For the record, I personally don't hate Peyton Manning. I think he's one of the truly great NFL players and in particular quarterbacks that I've seen in my lifetime. This whole notion that some of you have that I just hate Peyton Manning because he beat the Bears in the Super Bowl a few years back is ridiculous. Because if I operated off of that mentality, then why wouldn't I come on here and devote many, many videos over many years to spitting vitriol and hate and anger towards Aaron Rodgers? Why wouldn't I hold a grudge against Donovan McNabb for eliminating the Bears out of the playoffs in the 2001 season, or Jake Delhomme and Steve Smith in the 2005 season? You don't see me coming on and doing any of these videos about any of these guys. What I hate about Peyton Manning is what he represents and how he is presented to us by the national sports media. And frankly, this can go all the way back to his college days at Tennessee. For 4 years, he was presented as the second coming of Jesus Christ at quarterback. And yet all the while, when it came to, let's say, beating a Florida, he couldn't get the job done. He was 0-4. But there was always an excuse. There was always a spin factor. And yet we totally ignored the fact that the next year with T. Martin at quarterback, Tennessee did actually beat Florida and went on to win the national championship the year after Peyton leaves. This is a long systemic thing spanning the course of close to 2 decades now when it comes to Peyton Manning. He does these great and wonderful things that catches the sports world ablaze. The media loves him. Fans buy into the crap that the media sells them. And then when he does what he so often does, which is be great in the regular season and fall short, come crunch time, there is always some type of spin. There is a clear media bias. There is an attempt to excuse anything and everything that he does poorly, try to shift the emphasis onto other people, other factors, or focus just on the good and say, well, you can't sit there and knock him for the bad. And I've talked about this, talking about after they lost to the Ravens a couple of years ago in the divisional round, the Broncos, that Peyton Manning loses again, let the media bias show, and it clearly did. I talked about after Super Bowl 48 that Peyton Manning's legacy to me ultimately is chokes and excuses, and that's because it is. And now we get here, the 2014 NFL season. So many in the media were telling you that this Broncos team could go back to the Super Bowl, that Peyton Manning had a shot to win here. Most of them gave the Colts absolutely no chance of winning this game. And what happens? The Broncos did what so many Peyton Manning teams have done over the years. One and done. Goodbye, sayonara, see you. So I came on here Sunday night and did a video talking about the fact that Peyton Manning struck again in the playoffs. What's your excuse now? And I had to know something was coming. I just knew deep down inside that there was going to be some type of sanctimonious bullshit coming out of deep, deep roving right field that would sit there and completely blindside me and be like, oh my God, they went there. And lo and behold, wouldn't you know, Monday, that's exactly what the fuck happens. Now we've got Adam Schefter and other media outlets reporting that Peyton Manning was suffering through a partially torn right quad. And as a result, that naturally means that he wasn't 100%. And that naturally means that he couldn't be expected to be that Peyton Manning that you would expect. And that naturally, once again, is yet another excuse, a pathetic excuse at that, by the national sports media to try and deflect blame away from Peyton Manning and protect their golden boy, because again, that is bad for the NFL brand and bad for NFL business to sit there and badmouth the guy or hold him accountable for his crappy playoff performances over the years. As we sit there and watch Tom Brady now go to his 9th AFC Championship game, we have seen Peyton Manning for the 9th time in his career be one and done in the playoffs. I'm sorry, this is not a fluke. This is a trend. And for those of you that want to talk so much about Tom Brady having such superior talent around him all the time, isn't it funny that throughout Peyton Manning's career, more often than not, consistently, at least on the offensive side of the ball, the talent around Peyton Manning has been far superior than anything that Tom Brady has had. If you don't believe me, look at the F up, and you know it's damn true. It is. It clearly is. But here we are again, now making more excuses, new excuses, something that's only reported, mind you, really after the fact, whereas 6 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, when this first started, talking about he had a little bit of a leg injury, nothing was mentioned about a partially torn quad. Nothing was mentioned about this. Nothing was mentioned that was even that significant of an injury. Only after he lays yet another egg in the fucking playoffs does this become a story or a big issue, and it ultimately becomes a new excuse for the national sports media to use to try and deflect blame and criticism away from one of their poster children, one of their golden boys, because if they don't, they feel it'll be bad for NFL business and bad for the NFL and Peyton Manning brand. You know, when you look at Peyton Manning, he is who he freaking is, and I don't see why people can't acknowledge this. A great regular season player that consistently fails to come through in big-time clutch situations, and to deny that is ludicrous because it is 100% true. This has been proven to you time after time after time. To me, when I watched Peyton Manning on Sunday, the only two problems he had was one, the one muscle that really hurt him was, as often the case in the playoffs, his brain. He suffered from a significant brain cramp, as he so often does. And then, of course, his noodle arm. It didn't look like to me that we had a quarterback that was incredibly hobbled by a partially torn right quad. I've had a partially torn hamstring before. I could barely walk. I could barely do anything. To me, I didn't see a guy Sunday that was suffering through a partially torn muscle of any kind, especially a leg muscle, especially something like a freaking quad. I didn't see it, I don't believe it, and I don't buy this crap. This is just more excuse-making and attempting to deflect away from the real problem by the national sports media. Especially this whole logic and this whole narrative that this media will try to set by focusing on this injury and trying to make it about whether Peyton Manning will retire or not, and trying to get you all sentimental in the feels category to shift the blame and the focus away from his crappy performance again in the playoffs, is the fact that in the game before on Sunday, we saw a clearly hobbled Aaron Rodgers with a partially torn right calf, something that was documented ahead of time that you could actually see was impacting his ability to move throughout that game, still play well, and still make the big plays his team needed to be able to beat a good game Dallas Cowboys team and advance to the NFC Championship round. You can't sit there and see this with Aaron Rodgers and see him clearly hobbled, where you don't really see a Peyton Manning clearly hobbled by a leg injury, and then only really talk about this injury after the fact and try to use this as an excuse mechanism or a defense mechanism. This is why I've grown to resent Peyton Manning. It's not because of anything Peyton Manning says. Frankly, it's not because of anything that Peyton Manning does. It's because of this bullshit treatment and this bullshit bias from the national sports media. I'm not surprised that somebody like Adam Schefter would tweet this crap out there, because this is the narrative that tries to be set. We blame the play calling, but it's not Peyton Manning's fault. Even though when things go well and his team wins and plays well, everybody acknowledges that he's the ultimate signal caller, he's the ultimate play caller of that offense. We praise him 100% for everything that his teams do when they win, even though when it's not just about him. But when his teams lose, by God, it's everybody's fault but fucking him. Or if he does have a terrible game, as he did on Sunday, we sit there and say, well, it wasn't really that bad. It was this close. And no, he was terrible. He suffered from a severe brain cramp and a freaking noodle arm. He was who he is so often in the damn playoffs. This is not a fluke. This is a pattern. This is a clearly established trend throughout Peyton Manning's career, going all the way back to freaking Tennessee. And after almost 2 decades, you still have the media trying to excuse this, trying to bypass this, trying to spin you away from this and deflect you away from this, because they can't sit there and dare ruin any of the shine of their quarterback, of the second coming of Jesus Christ at the freaking position. Where was all this talk about the leg injury before this game? Where were the reports of the partially torn quad before the game? You had him with Aaron Rodgers. Don't sit there and tell me in today's media environment that if this information was known, that it wouldn't have gotten out before this game. Especially when you talk about the reports before the playoff game Sunday against the Colts, that if Fox lost, him and his staff might be shown the door. And look, they were. So all this shit that is known ahead of time, all these rumors that get out, a lot of times they get proven to be true. And the one thing that seems to be forgotten about is that nobody was reporting that Peyton Manning really had a partially torn right quad until after he laid that fucking egg in the divisional round against a so-so Colts defense. Can you not see the problem here, people? I've talked about the media bias. I talked about his legacy being chokes and excuses because it's true. And it pisses me off that fans and the national sports media have cultivated and created this environment that makes me view Peyton Manning in this light. But how could I view him in any other way? It's always something with this guy. There's always a fucking excuse. And I thought, finally, after this egg that he laid in the divisional round where Andrew Luck clearly outplayed him, even with throwing 2 interceptions during the game, that finally the excuse making would stop, and finally the spin would stop, and finally the bias would be eliminated. Oh, how wrong I was. When it comes to Peyton Manning, there's always a fucking excuse. And this one here about a partially torn right quad is the most convenient and perhaps ridiculous of all the excuses I have ever heard when it comes to defending this guy's pattern of pathetic performances in playoff situations.